Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. If you are a leader of any kind in the coffee shop, if you are a entrepreneur getting ready to start your own coffee shop, a roaster, somebody who has just a professional bent in coffee and want to really become better in your work and grow your business in a responsible and an integrity-filled way. This show is designed specifically to gather and curate interviews and best practices and insights to help you do just that. And we've been doing this now for 7 years. It's crazy to think about. I said 19 because I'm 46, going to be 46, so it feels like I'm still in the 1990s or something. But it was 2017 we started this, and now we're over 870 episodes in, and there's way more to cover. And I would encourage you, if you want to just be in touch with what's happening with Keys to the Shop, best way to do that, follow on Instagram at Keys to the Shop. Check out the website, keystotheshop.com. And of course, you have to subscribe. Subscribe to not only YouTube, if you're watching this on our channel, but also to the podcast itself on your podcast player. Just hit subscribe, and you'll get updated with all the new content. And the bonus is you can search topics within your podcast player. I prefer things like Overcast as an app for podcasts, but whatever you're using, maybe Spotify, then go ahead. But we're found everywhere. Keys to the Shop. So thank you very much. And, the other thing that Keys to the Shop is about is consulting and coaching. So we run the Keyholder Coaching Groups, which is a mastermind group of like-minded coffee business owners that want to improve their businesses and themselves in community. And we're running 2 groups now. We've expanded. We've doubled the size, which is cool. And the conversations are amazing. And we're going to be launching another cohort, another round of Keyholder Coaching Groups in the fall, right in the beginning of September. So if you're interested in being a part of this paid mastermind group of people that meets over the course of 6 months, 12 2-hour sessions that are intensive and conversational and challenging, accountability, it really is rewarding, then email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. And this is also where you can reach out if you just want to talk about working with me one-on-one as a coach for you and your team, or just to help your business grow and succeed. chris@keystotheshop.com. All right, so today's episode is brought to you by none other than the Ground Control Brewer. Ground Control has done in innovation what a lot of people don't do in innovation, and that is make coffee taste better. The award-winning technology allows you to make batch diced lattes with the espresso concentrate they produce. They do batched cold brew, plus amazing drip coffee. Groundcontrol.coffee is where you should go to learn more about this brewer. The new generation boasts 30% higher output of those batched espresso and cold brew functions, but also it's smaller, so it can fit in more places in your cafe. So I'm a fan. I've seen what it can do. I think you should see what it can do as well. So again, to do that, go to groundcontrol.coffee and tell them Chris sent you from Keys to the Shop. And yeah, love those guys, and I think you will too. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series. The Barista Series is the original cornerstone plant-based beverage for coffee. And I can say this because I've been around long enough to know what was available when I first started 25 years ago, and it wasn't much, but what was there was Pacific, and it was good, and it's gotten better and better. You know why? Because Pacific has been dedicated at the Barista Series to looking at what baristas want. What does the coffee shop need? What do the people making the coffee prefer? They make these beverages for baristas and are tested by baristas, so it stands up to the heat from steaming, keeps amazing, great texture for latte art, and also keeps the balance of the beverage focused on the coffee as far as the taste is concerned. So these are things that make up a good beverage. It's like the thing you want with a good milk, a good milk alternative, but this is this performance beverage designed for the coffee shop. So pacificfoodservice.com. is where you should go, and you can find their services, their offerings, but get samples, try it for yourself, and I think you're going to be impressed, truly. And so if you want the best plant-based products for your customers, then you should be checking out the Barista series from Pacific. Today we are going to be talking about roasteries. We're going to be talking with somebody who is an engineer whose mind is just formed to the idea of efficiencies in if due diligence in thinking through processes and like the science of process and what makes the most sense and can maximize the efficiency of your facility was a person, it would be today's guest, Scott Stouffer, who is the CSO at Probat SE. So Scott Stouffer leads sales globally for Probat Coffee. Scott was previously the VP of Sales and Services for Probat Incorporated, the U.S. subsidiary of Probat. And he previously worked, before Probat in coffee roasting, he previously worked in supply chain operations for Starbucks Coffee Company and also in R&D for Kraft General Foods. And Scott also has a BS in chemical engineering from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Scott had a conversation with me on the show floor of the SCA. So SCA yielding some pretty cool conversations. There's so many to count. Last week we talked with Jolima of Paisa Coffee, and this week another show floor conversation extended into a podcast episode to talk about roastery efficiencies. Now Scott's working with some giant operations, and when I say giant, you might think, oh yeah, like really big roasteries, but I mean like it might as well be a city. And so the liabilities that you have to think through, the regulations, the safety, the efficiency of energy and good use of your invested dollars into equipment and how it's being used, these are the things that are Scott's bread and butter. And you're going to hear it in today's episode. A lot of why Scott is in the position he is in is because of sort of championing these efficiencies for the benefit of the people that use the Probat roaster and engage the team that Scott leads to make them more efficient. So no matter what your size, I mean, you could be working out of one room to roast your coffee versus an entire 20,000 square foot building. It doesn't matter. The efficiencies are things that you should be focused on. And Scott drops so much knowledge here in this conversation. So you should get a pen and paper ready, or your notes app, or just go back and listen to it over and over again and do it while you sleep. So you get it in that like subconscious of yours. Because I think these are the things that can make you more successful and creating efficiencies in the cafe as well as the roastery is how we mitigate waste and also the downtime or the safety issues or stoppage due to running up against regulations. There's a lot of things to consider. So today's a great conversation to help you as a business person run a tight business. So let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with the CSO of Probat Coffee, Scott Stouffer. Hey, Scott, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you?
Hi, Chris. I'm well today. Good to be here.
Yeah, this was a conversation that we had briefly, like very briefly on the show floor of the SCA. And it fascinated me. And I was like, this needs to be something that's talked about at length on the show, because managing and engineering efficiencies in the roastery or anywhere in coffee, a lot of times it's like guesswork. It's maybe the like pocket science, if you will, the way we do with brewed coffee. We leave a lot of things on the table, but this is your area of expertise. This is your sweet spot. And I'm excited to dive into it because I think you're going to shed some light on some pretty important areas. So maybe we should just get an introduction to where you are in the world of coffee and how you got there. what is your role at Probat, and how did you get into the engineering element of roastery plants?
I'm really glad we had the conversation at SCA, and I'm glad that it led to a little bit deeper conversation because there are certainly parts of the coffee roasting and coffee processing flow that are a little bit of art. Um, but how you design a roasting plant and make the best use of it is not really an art. There's some science and engineering there. So I'm happy to talk about that because that is precisely what I do. Um, I am a chemical engineer by training. So I got a degree in chemical engineering from Purdue University, great school, happy to have graduated from there. And I have worked almost 35 years in food processing, but specifically for the last 30, I have worked in coffee. And upon graduation, I never thought that I would be a coffee process engineer, but yet here I am. So the first 14 years that I was in coffee process engineering, I worked for that mermaid company out in Seattle and built roasting plants. I was a project engineer, worked in R&D, did environmental management, various roles that a rapidly expanding company needed to do. And I learned a tremendous amount. Um, I had the opportunity about 15 years ago to move to Probat, and I worked for Probat in North America for about 14 years, and I did precisely what I had done for the last 15 years. I was helping customers design roasting plants, meet environmental requirements, maximize throughput and capacity, expand their facilities, minimize labor, minimize energy consumption, whatever the process part was that they needed to optimize. We might have covered this on the SCA show floor, but I can tend to be a little bit outspoken and opinionated. And about 18 months ago, my current boss, who's the general manager of the Probat group, thought that I needed to be a little bit outspoken and opinionated with the sales team over in Germany. So 18 months ago, I took the role of chief sales officer for Probat globally for the coffee division of what we do. And so my job today is technically it's in Germany, but I do still have a lot of interaction here in North America, as well as with our daughter companies in Brazil and in India. So I'm a coffee process engineer on the global stage now. It's pretty fun.
It sounds fun, and you're working with such a variety of different contexts. There's in my mind, there's just giant roasting companies, and then there's independent, smaller, mid-sized roasting companies, and how engineering gets applied across those different categories is, I imagine, just a matter of scaling the same principles, but I'll bet that there's a little bit more nuance to it than just that, because you're dealing also with people and not just inanimate objects as well. What are some of the variety of contexts that you find yourself oscillating between, and how do you pivot between them, and what are those considerations that you're making when you do so?
Well, you are precisely correct. There's a variety of needs that you look from the scale of the operation, even the location of the operation. So we might be a German company, but we have to think globally and have to think locally wherever that is. And the solutions that we provide in North America might not be the right solution for us to provide in Brazil or for us to provide in China. So we certainly have to think about what local accommodations we have to take. And then we also have to think, as you can imagine, on scale. So as we think about scale, somebody that's starting out with a shop roaster business has different requirements. And when I say different requirements, they're thinking different things about how do I manage my process? How much touch do I have to it? How am I going to manage quality? How am I going to train people that are going to work for me? That's one type of scale that, a shop owner that has 6 employees thinks of. If you're a large co-packer for McDonald's, you have a different thought. And they're all about what is the consistent quality that I have to produce? How do I meet, my customers' quality standards, my customers' environmental and social standards? How do I meet? Maybe there's labor standards they have to meet. McDonald's rolls out labor standards, or Walmart rolls out labor standards for some of their customers. So all of that comes into play, and that's a whole different discussion when you're talking to somebody that's roasting at that scale, as opposed to somebody that's roasting on a 5 or 12 kilo machine.
Yeah, I bet. And in terms of how they get their plant up and running and built, the ultimate goal is to deliver on the consistency and to satisfy the stakeholders in terms of how that brand is represented in the market. The taste profile of something like you mentioned, a McDonald's, would be different, I imagine, than a roastery who's built their brand based on a more adventurous, like it needs to be consistent, but the variation of flavors is an asset and not a liability.
Well, for sure. I mean, you have a different expectation if you're buying a cup of coffee at a McDonald's at whatever time of the day as you're driving down the highway. That's a different expectation than when maybe you're meeting your friend at the local coffee shop and excited to see something new on their menu. And you're going to have a whole different conversation with the person that's working behind the counter. I'm not sure I have a conversation with the McDonald's person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you're designing a plant for somebody who is embracing the variety and the adventure of having that kind of a choice, seasonality in coffee and that kind of thing, I imagine what goes into the design of the plant has to practically, like in steel and bolts and blueprints, absorb the demand of that expectation and be flexible to create that versus a company that has one product that has been a legacy product that needs to be consistent. Are there different tolerances that need to be built into a plant just structurally for those two different kinds of expectations or models?
There certainly are. So, and there's different ways that you handle that depending upon the size of the operation. If our customer is a local customer, they have maybe they're supplying 3 coffee shops, maybe they're even lucky enough to have their coffee in Whole Foods. That's great. That's probably a very manual process. They're getting a pallet of coffee from a local supplier, or they're even on that pallet, it might be mixed. There might be 2 or 3 different types of coffee on that pallet. But what is important to that customer is that the roaster, which is probably the single piece of equipment they have in their plant that's automated, but that roaster has the ability to control the roast process for the different types of coffee. They might have an espresso that they roast a little darker. They might have a really exotic Panamanian coffee that they think works a little lighter. So that can be done either completely manually. The person can take their notes and they can modulate the burner and control it completely manually. Or our machines, just like a lot of the machines that are out there, have automation programs, and you can have 500 recipes on there. You can have your Panamanian light roast recipe. You can have your Costa Rica dark roast recipe. You can have however you want to call it. It can be your recipe for May 15th, your Panamanian light roast. And then the roaster tracks that. It maintains, a certain amount of history. Our roasters are all capable to be hooked up to these third-party web-based data storage systems like Cropster or Artisan. And if that's the system that you want to use, you can use that to log your information, put your tasting notes in there, and that's all great. But the person that's roasting on that 25 kilo machine or that 10 kilo machine wants to be able to educate her baristas or educate the one salesperson that he has that goes out and tells their bakery accounts, hey, we have this new Panamanian geisha coffee. It's got these amazing floral notes. Bob, the roaster, roasted it, and have everything that Bob, who roasted it, available for those people to be able to represent that to the end customer. So that's how we do that on the small scale. On the larger scale, we have customers we work with that roast maybe 500 different SKUs for hundreds of different customers. So they roast for, chain stores like Wawa that's on the East Coast that has some reasonable coffee. They will roast for local cafes that have some reasonable coffee. And then on the same machines, they can do McDonald's. And so then this becomes data. This becomes lot management. And we have scheduling systems that allow an automatic schedule download from the customer's ERP or their enterprise resource system to transmit a schedule that says, boy, today we're going to do 20,000 pounds of McDonald's, but we're going to do 1,000 pounds of, a specialty gourmet espresso, and we're going to do one cycle on the small roaster of 60 kilos of this Panamanian geisha that's going to, somebody's specialty coffee shop. That whole schedule gets put into an automated process that runs the entire plant, tracks every blower that turns on that transfers coffee from a silo to a roaster, tracks every gate valve that's open that directs coffee to roaster number 3 compared to roaster number 4, measures the shrink. We can measure the moisture content. We save the roast curve information. It was 12 minutes. It went to 421 degrees. The operator can input a color score. We can tell you which packaging line it went to and how many bags got produced and on what pallet, and that pallet can be barcoded and automatically taken into inventory in the warehouse. So that can occur with 50 different types of coffee that might be roasted on a 24-hour period in a 3-roaster or 4-roaster plant, and every single batch can be kept straight, and you can have all of the detailed information about where it went through and how we know that one 60-kilo batch of that one special coffee got to the bags that it was supposed to get to. That's all.
Wow.
So when I say there's some engineering that goes into this, that's the work of half a dozen controls engineers and a couple of process engineers and half a dozen mechanical engineers that laid out that coffee plant.
I imagine a lot of the data and the tools that you have to come up with and use in creating these kinds of plants it matriculates a little bit into the independent smaller ones as well, and benefits them, like the way that we can sometimes borrow from the corporate world the way that they've systematized SOPs for the cafe, and that it's applicable to us is evident now. And maybe we were scared of it before, but now it's part of it. So in the same way, I wonder if you've seen, as we've matured in the smaller roasting operations, the independent specialty focused operations, are we starting to embrace a lot more of these engineered efficiencies versus organically grown systems that we just kind of grandfather in, and maybe there's waste there, but it's our waste and we love it,
Yeah. You are absolutely correct. This might be a little bit of a sad statement, but the U.S. is not leading in this. Europe is leading. and mostly because of the desire for renewable energy and the desire for reducing
Mm.
greenhouse gas emissions that's really prevalent in Europe. But you see, maybe it's prevalent in California too. But okay, so you certainly see technology that's developed on the larger scale making its way to small scale operations. And that can be electrically heated catalyzers, for example, that we have rolled out in North America with a partner that makes catalyst systems. That can be um, filter systems that we put on exhaust. It's roasting with hydrogen or roasting with electricity, and we build both hydrogen and electric powered roasters up to size 12 kilos. And we can do hydrogen roasters much larger, but there's not really a place where there's a sustainable hydrogen grid on the planet yet. Okay, so but we do build, and we have sold a couple of hydrogen roasters, generally in the small scale. But the electric roasters are really coming along, and that's going to be from 1 kilo in size all the way up to a 4,000 kilo per hour roaster that we have sold that's going to be installed next year in Belgium. Be a windmill powered machine.
Wow. Yeah. I notice a little bit more also with, you're talking a lot in terms of the tools available, but also in the know-how for setting up efficiencies of workflow in plants themselves. I notice over the years I've been in coffee, the roasteries that I was working in or I get to be a part of seeing behind the scenes 15 years ago or 20 years ago were a lot more slapdash put together than now when we see people. Either they're the same roasters who have grown up and adopted really good efficiencies, or they've started from a higher expectation point, like a point of expectation that we're going to set this up really professionally. And I guess that I'm curious if you've seen the same thing. And then the follow up to that would be opening up a lot of probably some opinions, which is what are the most important efficiencies roasters need to consider when starting their roastery, no matter their size?
A lot of questions there. um, I'll take a shot. I'll take a shot at a few. No matter your size, your roastery must be compliant to a whole range of regulations in your area, and regulations exist. So I'll start with the obvious ones and the easy ones. If you are going to go get a spec warehouse down the street and you're going to put a coffee roaster into that spec warehouse, 12 kilo roaster, great. You better think about how I'm going to get green coffee into this, where I'm going to put my roll around totes of roasted coffee. You better mark out your space and do things like make sure that you're not putting anything in front of a fire exit. Make sure that the electrical panels in the building have 36 inches of space in front of them. Make sure that the exit sign that has to be illuminated can be seen because you haven't done something like put the afterburner of the roaster right in front of it. Make sure that if there's hot surfaces on your roaster, that they're marked.
Yeah.
Right. I don't care if you've got a 5 kilo machine or you've got a 1,500, 150, 1,500 kilo per hour machine. All these things that I just mentioned, that's kind of required by the fire code in your area. When the fire alarm gets pulled, people have to be able to see the exit and get out. You have to make sure that things like fire sprinklers appropriately access things in your building. I'm saying things that are really obvious, but you're going to put up racking and you're going to store your packaging materials on racking. Even though you've only got a 12 kilo machine, you're going to go down to Home Depot, you're going to buy racking, put your packaging materials, maybe you're going to have a light forklift and you're going to store coffee on that rack. coffee's flammable, your packaging materials are flammable, and you're going to get dinged if a fire inspector ever walks through your building because you don't have in-rack fire sprinklers. Okay, so no matter your size, you have to take these types of things into consideration. The next thing that you have to take into consideration is your roaster has a stack. Your stack goes through the roof. And you have to know the air permit requirements in the area where you are operating. If you have only a 1 kilo roaster, you might, that's a big, air quotes, you might be able to put the stack through your roof and not get a permit. Or get a general permit like this is food preparation equipment. As soon as you move to something that's more than 10 pounds per batch, you're going to have an air permit anywhere in the United States. And you have to know what is required in the regulation of that air permit. And ignorance of the law is never an excuse for not complying. And there are no grandfather rules in air permitting. So I get this all the time. I have a 12 kilo roaster that I bought. It's used, but it's grandfathered because it's, from 1960. Yeah, that's not true. There's no grandfather.
So you think a lot of people are, with just what you've mentioned, which I imagine is just the tip of the iceberg, a lot of people are just not doing these things because they're getting away with it for now. But I imagine you've seen many cases where people had that mindset and did actually, get away with it or didn't know, but then got shut down as a result or got in trouble as a result.
There are jurisdictions or municipalities that will shut you down. It is much more common, and I'll bet we get this call 2 or 3 times a year. It's much more common that an inspector walked through the door of the facility and said, you're operating with either a very outdated permit or you don't have a permit. Here's a notice. You need to come to my office next Wednesday at 8 a.m. and we need to talk about what you're going to do in the next 90 days to remediate your facility, or you're going to get fined. And then fines can be $1,000 per occurrence. And by occurrence, that's every time you roast a batch and smoke comes out your stack. So you could get fined $1,000 4 times an hour. If this happens, I'm just going to say, if this happens, and it could also happen, like let's say, I'm giving you horror stories. Let's say you have a neighbor that has made a complaint. And now the inspector is obligated, the enforcement person is obligated to come to your facility. And if this person's had a bad day, and it's everything I'm telling you has happened, he can sit outside your facility for 3 days and watch the black smoke puffs come out your stack and walk into your facility and say, I have observed 36 incidences where you broke this code of the local air, this section of the local air quality. Here's 36 notices of violation. If that happens, you should find a lawyer. All of those fines are negotiable if you can negotiate a consent order to remediate the system, remediate the problem. Let's say you're operating a 25 kilo roaster and you don't have an afterburner because you didn't think you needed one. Maybe it's a 1962 L25, right? You think it's grandfathered. It's not. Every 25 or every 15 minutes, puff of black smoke from the end of your roast cycle goes out your roof. You get 36 notices of violations. It's $36,000. Go hire a lawyer. The lawyer's going to go into the local air quality district with you at your time of your appointment and say, this is onerous for me as a small business. I can't do this and remediate. You're going to shut me down. You're going to put 12 people out of work. He's going to sing the right song. And then they're going to say, okay, well, how about there's no more notices of violation for 90 days. And in 90 days, you have to have an afterburner. Okay. Give us a call. We have an afterburner. We put an afterburner on, whatever the correct solution is, a small catalytic oxidizer, a filtration system, whatever the correct solution is for your municipality. You can get the right technical data from us. You can get that afterburner permitted, and hopefully your $36,000 worth of fines go away. And after 90 days, you're up and running. And then you're going to pay a lot of attention to the new permit that you have and what you have to do to comply.
And all of this, just as looking through what the possibilities of what happens as a result of not doing due diligence is avoidable by doing the due diligence, by investigating. And that's part of how you set things up as an engineer, or when you hire somebody to help you engineer a space based on your needs. These are the considerations that you're not going to. We do this with SOPs, with how to clean the cafe. We're not going to put OSHA violations in one of the bullet points to instruct you to do something dangerous as a part of the SOP, right? So that makes total sense. Now, let's say that somebody is good to go, due diligence done, everything is A+. They still could be operating an inefficient roasting operation. And there's some things that you and I have talked about regarding the flow of work in the roastery to maximize the use of the investment into the overhead and the equipment. What are some of the most important guiding principles for a streamlined operation that maximizes the use of that space?
And I'm going to say some things for you that are going to sound really basic, but yet, I don't see them occur regularly. So you have two major costs for your coffee roaster besides the green coffee. You got the person that's running it, and you got the natural gas that the unit is consuming. So don't come in at 6 o'clock in the morning, turn on the roaster and turn on the afterburner to get everything heated up when your roasting operator is not getting there until 9:30. Right? A roaster should heat up maybe somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes. The afterburner does not need to heat up that amount of time. The afterburner needs maybe like 5 minutes to heat up. Only turn the roaster on when you need to turn it on. And if you're going to take a break for 2 or 3 hours, your roasting operator, you've done roasting the coffee that you need to roast right now, and your operator's going to go help pack it or whatever she's going to do, turn the machine off. Turn the machine off. Leave the fan running. You don't want the machine to overheat, so you can leave the roaster fan running so the machine cools down properly. And then 20 minutes before you need it again, come back and turn it on.
Right.
Right. And then the other thing that I mentioned is labor. If you have 3 days worth of roasting to do, schedule those 3 days and bring your roasting operator in those 3 days. Don't bring your roaster operator in all 5 days of the week and only roast 4 hours a day, and then have your operator standing around doing nothing the other 4 hours. Now, if your operator is also packaging, if your operator is driving the delivery truck, that's a whole nother story, right? But make sure that you utilize the people and the equipment. If you have a slightly larger roaster, I'm not going to name names here, but there's a roasting company that has about 4 roasters that are between the size of like a 22 and a 120 kilos per batch, right? And you can tell they grew organically, and they have operators pushing around rubber buckets, those gray Rubbermaid totes, to go get green coffee, and they're weighing out for a 120 kilo machine. They're weighing out 40 kilos of this and 60 kilos of that and 20 kilos of that in order to get their blend. That's with those bins sitting on scales and people scooping beans out of bags or picking up the remains of a bag and dumping it in. And then they roll their bucket back and they stick a suction hose into it, and they suction hose that up to the top of the G120, and then they roast their batch. And the same thing's occurring for their 45 and their 60 and their 25 kilo machine.
Right.
And that G120 probably does 2 cycles an hour. And there's 4 people pushing around Rubbermaid bins. And the owner of the plant says, man, we are so busy. We're running this all like 2 and a bit shifts a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And I just want to scratch my head and say, you are big enough here. You're going to do 2 or 3 million pounds of coffee a year. It's awesome. Good for you. You would do really well to have a small silo group that had a scale underneath it and a transport system. And you automatically batched up that coffee and you sent it to the roaster, to that G120. And when a roast batch is started, the system automatically sends the next batch to that G120, and the roasting operator can stand there at the G120 and do cycle after cycle after cycle. You could probably get done in 1 shift what you're doing today in 2. And that's half the gas, because you left those roasters sitting there running, idling, while these people are running around filling up Rubbermaid bins, and it's half the labor.
Yeah.
And we didn't take anything away from the quality. We actually probably made the quality better, because a weighing process is something that's going to be more accurate than somebody hand scooping beans.
So that's a waste in the production flow that you mentioned. Organic growth. People grandfather in roasters, but they also grandfather in practices. So they
for sure
get used to it. It's hard to really see it objectively. How do you get, well, I mean, I guess you just show them where they could be saving money and energy. And in this case, obviously, it would be easier for the roasters because they don't have to do that transport step. But that's a big bridge to cross to invest in the silos and the transport system. So you'd have to be pretty convinced of that. How do you get people over that hump?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm a process engineer. Part of what I do is I examine different ways to run your roasting plant and do a cost analysis for each and say, you're paying $50,000 a month in natural gas, and that if you only ran your roasters half as much, that'd be $25,000 a month. And this is the wasted time in your process. That G120 is only running 2 cycles an hour, and it should be running 4 because you have 15-minute roast cycles. So, and here's what you're spending on labor, and you say your cost per month could go from $400,000 per month in gas and labor, could go down to, like, let's say $250,000 a month in gas and labor. And if this silo system looks like a big ticket of $600,000 for this silo system, I'm making up a number, right? This looks like a big ticket, but your payback is like 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus the capacity you gain for more business in the future.
Plus the capacity you gain. Plus, I'm throwing in other benefits here. You now have, if there's automation, there's a record.
Yeah.
And if you're doing 4 cycles of espresso blend and 2 cycles of house blend, followed by 8 cycles of cafe blend, whatever, you actually can prove to your customer that your cafe blend was indeed a 50-50 blend of Brazil and Colombia, if that's what it was supposed to be, because every time the scale transacted, you have a record. and you know that that was sent to roaster number 2. That, by the way, is to me, the logical way to sell it, the logical way to get the customer over the hump of what they have to do. The way that I don't want to see happen is the customer that has 4 roasting operators pushing Rubbermaid bins around has somebody run into somebody else with a Rubbermaid bin and a broken ankle and an OSHA violation.
Yeah.
Now you have another problem. And sure, the automated system that we talked about eliminates pushing all these rubber bins around. But it would have been a whole lot better if Susie didn't get a broken ankle because Bobby ran over her ankle with a rubber bin.
There's an ethic, I think, that gets put into larger operations still, especially when they're grown organically. The scrappy entrepreneurial spirit allows for allowances, I suppose, where it feels a little bit more like we're in this together, kind of, too much automation and too much, engineering and focus on the numbers takes away energy from other more culturally rich elements of what we're focusing on. And I suppose, it depends on how you view it, but we're fond of saying that systems are a form of care, and that if we would borrow a page from your playbook, we don't all have to be engineers, but the engineering mind, you could cultivate it and have it live happily alongside of that artistic mind and have one feed the other. So I guess if you're an operator, you could practice this thought experiment that you just did, which is do the math on what would happen to make your money back, to gain capacity, to increase safety and accuracy. It all sounds really great, but we would just have to slow down long enough to actually think that through.
Sure. You made a statement too before about maybe the engineer can come alongside the artist or something like that. That being the engineer, that's what we do. We have a whole engineering toolbox of how we can move coffee around, manage that automation process. There's no 2 solutions that are really the same. We provide different solutions for different customers all the time. And I never expect the owner or the plant manager or the roast master of a facility to know what those solutions are. And sometimes, they can even be ignorant, for example, about what the OSHA requirements are. They might be ignorant about, they probably shouldn't be, right? But they might be ignorant about what the emission standards are in their area. They've been lucky, but they should scratch their head and say, hey, my G120 and my G60 are in a quasi-residential area. And I know that the black smoke on a rainy day, the black smoke just lays on the ground and rolls across the street. Maybe I should pay attention to that. And you could call us. You could call your roaster manufacturer, but you should be calling somebody to see if you can get some help to make sure that you are the good neighbor.
Yeah.
And we'll. I know that my company provides options and provides solutions. So let us be the engineers. You be the artist. You make the right espresso. You figure out how to do your cold brew, whatever it is. That's what you do well. Let us provide the solution for the manufacturing process.
And the catalyst for needing a solution, like the recognition of the need for a solution, that is still, that's the prerogative of the people operating it, to say, I think there's something here that needs to be made better. And maybe it's just a matter of making a regular schedule of examining the efficiencies and the throughput of your facility, and just making small changes that in aggregate create large scale impact. You reminded me of the lean manufacturing principle, the Kaizen principle of Muda, of waste, and how I've heard lots of stories about somebody, an engineer, walked the floor and changed where people were putting the basket of screws 2 feet in production of like the Camry or the Corolla, and it ended up saving millions of dollars over the course of the fiscal year. And it always stuck with me. I'm like, this is not, you don't see that when you, unless you're looking for it, right? When we hear at the size you are, you should have, how do we know we're at that size where we should have something, where we should be scratching our heads going like, maybe it's time for us to level up? Is there a certain threshold of numbers of pounds per year? What would your advice be?
Never be afraid to phone a friend. That's one thought, right? So if 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 you have a friend that's a part of a business organization, you're a member of the, you know, small business association of your city, uh, find somebody that is in a dissimilar small business, you know, and say, hey, would you come? I'll give you a pound of coffee. Could you come and take a look at my operation and tell me if you see places where maybe we're being unsafe, or maybe where we have people doing tasks that really should be automated, or maybe there's some place that you clearly see some type of leakage, whether that's energy waste or raw material waste or something. Um, I think you would really, every small business owner might be terribly surprised at what the guy down the street, maybe he installs mufflers. Okay, he's the local Jiffy Lube owner, but he might walk into your facility and immediately say, "Holy, you don't track your orders automatically? You're writing it on a chalkboard? What is that?" You know, he's going to have something that he can lend to you. Um, so that's one thing. You should be networking. You should be a part of Baristas Guild, Roasters Guild. You should be a part of the local Roasters Guild chapter. Something. What are other people doing? How have other people solved the problem that you have two roasters and you now have to go to a second shift? How have they solved that problem?
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to call uh, whoever supplied your roaster or whoever supplied your grinder. They probably have ideas,
That's a really good advice. And I don't think we think about that locally, but we do it when we read business books.
right?
We, because we're like, well, the people in my town, nah, but this guy wrote a book and he's in a different industry, so I'll listen to him. Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And when it comes to it sounds like there might not be any hard and fast rule of once you crest 1 million pounds a year, you should get a silo system, or once you cross the threshold of roasting this many days per week on this size of roaster, you should think about consolidating to a larger roaster. Or I don't know if those principles exist or it really is just custom for your circumstance.
I have a really hard time telling somebody when they're too busy to do something. So 30 years ago, I worked for Starbucks. And Starbucks was in a lot of local restaurants, and they had a lot of locally blended coffee, and they had people that drove vans and they serviced those. It was a big deal to have their coffee in your restaurant. And at some point, the company got so big they said they couldn't do that anymore. And for me, it felt like there was a little bit of luster that was lost, a little bit of personal touch that was lost.
Hmm.
They they certainly, they focused on airport stores. They focused on big hotel chains. Maybe that was the right business decision for that company in that growth model. But if you have a good business and you're serving 12 cafes and you're personally delivering to those 12 cafes, and your customer's happy and you're making money, I have a really hard time telling you, yeah, you need to hire a different route driver and become much more efficient with the way you do this and pay somebody less money that does that because you can do that more efficiently, or you need to get your coffee on the Cisco truck that drives around because the Cisco driver can deliver more efficiently. Boy, the Cisco driver doesn't have a relationship with the woman that's pulling espresso shots in the afternoon. So I, I don't really want to tell somebody that what they're doing is wrong unless I clearly see waste, like the people pushing around the Rubbermaid bins. That's clearly seeing waste and there's money lost. So I just told you it's a fine line. It's gray.
I like that you did that because there are a lot of intangibles that contribute to the depth and, as you call it, the luster that is not Cropster doesn't track luster, you know.
No.
And so but you
No.
do. So it's not efficiency at all costs or to the detriment of the depth of relationship, but you do have the responsibility to recognize where those values are, what is valuable, and how maybe efficiencies will introduce an enhancement of value uh, across the company.
I think it's also maybe relevant to think about, is this activity value add?
Mm-hmm.
So when the guy is driving the delivery van and he spends a half hour training the baristas between lunch and dinner on how you pull espresso shots, and now you know that this 3-star restaurant has waiters, and you train the bartender and the head waiter to make the right cappuccino, and now you know that they're serving your coffee really well. That's value add.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I never want to take that. I never want to. I want to reward that driver. He's representing our product in a really good way at that really nice restaurant.
Yeah.
That's great for everybody. It's great for the restaurant. It's great for me. It's good for the customer.
These are all great points. Yeah.
Man, because I hate to go to a nice restaurant and have a bad cup of coffee.
Yep.
So, but at the same time, then you look at it and say, maybe 16 hours a day hand scooping beans into a rolling Rubbermaid bin. Boy, that does not look like value add.
And so we need to be present. We need to see. We need to examine. And yeah, there's a lot of things that I think you've shared here that we can take and practice in our own roasteries. And not only in the roastery, I think just the cafe. If there's listeners out there that don't have a roastery yet, the same thing applies for any process of production that requires work and the assembly of items for purchase. These are all just universal principles. So,
Sure.
yeah. Scott, I really appreciate your time and for you sharing with us here so generously. I really appreciate it. Where can we learn more about what you do and what Probat offers? Give us the details there.
Boy, the easiest way to reach us is through our website. And, you can go to probat.com and you can find us. Our service teams, all of our sales managers have their picture on their website and the regions that they're in.
Yeah.
So you can find their picture, click on their picture, and send them an email. You'll also find my picture there. You can click on me, and you can send me an email. And if I'm not everywhere all the time, so I might refer you to Mr. Lado that serves Brazil, or I might refer to our agent in Mexico. But I'll get you in touch with the right people.
Sounds awesome. Scott, thank you again.
Thank you. It was great talking with you.
Okay, everyone. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. This was, like I said, very filled with just practical advice and things that you need to be aware of. So you could come up with a big list of things that Scott talked about and just work your way through it as a punch list for, have we done that? Have we done that? How will we explore that? And you will be way better off for it. And so I'm really grateful for Scott taking the time to share the wealth of information that he holds from the practice of this in small and large settings globally. So thank you, Scott. Amazing stuff. And if you are interested in more of what Probat has to offer, there's a couple places you could go. You can go to probat.com. That's the easiest one, probat.com. Or if you're in the US, you can go to probatusa.com. But you should definitely check them out and see what they have to offer. And Scott is, really cultivated a lot of wisdom in the business at Probat that you benefit from when you engage with their team. So check them out at probat.com. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback from me about today's episode, then feel free, reach out. It's just chris@keystotheshop.com, CHRIS @keystotheshop.com. And I would be glad to hear from you if you have just positive things to say, like, hey, like the show, or hey, why haven't you ever covered this? And maybe it would be cool. Or just you have a question about coffee shops and leadership or management or career. These are the kinds of things I love when I get to talk to the listeners. So don't be shy about reaching out. You can DM as well. I hope you're following on Instagram @KeysToTheShop. So just reach out. It'd be awesome. And don't forget to share the posts, share the episodes, subscribe on YouTube, as well as your podcast player of choice. And I also want to let you know, if you want to just chat or something, you can find me at Coffee Fest. I'm going to be there every show this year. And I think maybe you should be too. Not at every show, but at one of the shows coming up. Coffeefest.com is where you can learn more. Coffee Fest has been running for 30 years, and it is a resource like no other. You get to just be in community as a coffee community, like the baristas, the owners, roasters, everyone gathers 4 times a year at various cities. We just had New York City earlier this year. Now we're going to go to New Orleans coming up in about 3 weeks. And then there is Los Angeles, followed by Minneapolis, Minnesota. So coffeefest.com, learn more about what they're offering, free or accessibly priced services like workshops and lectures and panel discussions. And people walk away from this thing very encouraged and very resourced to run a great coffee shop. Probably the best investment you're going to make in terms of events outside everything, including just like the expo or something like that. And I know that's a big thing to say, but I'm a big fan of practical takeaways to help the average small business. And Coffee Fest has concentrated this into what they offer with the trade show as well as the educational offerings. So there it is. I hope that you come by, say hello. I'll be doing some talking and workshops, as will many other people. Again, check it out, coffeefest.com. So today, that is going to be it. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you. Go ahead and listen to more of the show. If you're interested in more roasting episodes, then there are a few linked episodes below if you're watching on YouTube. Otherwise, in the show notes on your podcast player, on roasting and building efficiencies, or the idea of setting it up well. We've covered a lot of different subjects around roasting, so go ahead and keep going down that rabbit hole to keep on resourcing yourself. And as always, grateful for you. I truly hope that today's episode has given you keys to the shop.